Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of the Scene to Screen podcast. I'm AJ, and this is my review of the new Paul Thomas Anderson film, Phantom Thread. Paul Thomas Anderson is a writer, director, producer known for his expansive narratives, lavish production design, superlative cinematography, and his penchant for working on some of the more out-there period pieces of the past couple of decades. He's a personal favourite of mine, with Boogie Nights and The Master in particular being two of my all-time favourite films. His last film, Inherent Vice, was an adaptation of Thomas Pynchon's 2009 novel of the same name, and although it was strong in many of the classic PTA ways, it was a fantastic looking film with an incredible feel and atmosphere, in this case being drenched in a haze of pot smoke and great music. I found the narrative and characters to be somewhat lacking. However, I think it'd be impossible for me to not be heavily anticipated for a PTA film, so regardless of my opinions on Inherent Vice, I was excited to see what he'd created this time, especially as it reunited him with Daniel Day-Lewis, the three-time Oscar winner who portrayed the terrifying, determined and vengeful Daniel Plainview in Anderson's 2007 film There'll Be Blood. So going into Phantom Thread, I had some expectations, but with Anderson being who he is, I expected also to have a lot of stuff thrown at me that I wasn't expecting either, especially considering that I avoided the trailers, which is pretty standard for me as I like going into the cinema with as few preconceptions as possible. So first off, what worked? Well, the obvious place to start is with the acting. Daniel Day-Lewis is on fine form as Reynolds Woodcock, and as usual you can tell that he has been inhabiting this character and he's been getting to know him and understanding all of his precise mannerisms. He plays him with considerable restraint, delivering most of his lines with a quaint precision that allows the audience to sense a darker tension within him. It doesn't quite feel like a final performance, but that seems appropriate for this diverse and unpredictable master of his craft. He imbues Reynolds with a possibly autistic kind of genius. He knows what he wants, but he doesn't always go about it in the most socially acceptable or sensible manner, and any change in his routine is visibly torturous to him. Nonetheless, he does have a caring side, albeit one that he isn't always ready to give away. His interactions with the other characters form the bulk of the movie, and with a lesser actor in his place, I think the film could have fallen apart by the halfway point. Vicky Krieps and Lesley Manville round out the main players in this story, with two very different but equally impressive performances. Krieps portrays Alma, the love interest of Reynolds. She's one of those actors who can do a lot with very little, often matching Day-Lewis's restraint, and often going even further. She is often impossible to read, even when she starts showing her emotions more readily. She was doing a lot with her facial expressions that it gave away this real sort of vulnerability, but as the film goes on you realise that maybe she isn't quite as vulnerable, but she keeps up that kind of facade for the most part. It's a very interesting performance. Manville, on the other hand, plays Reynolds' sister Cyril. She is another character with more depth than she would like to let on. She's ice cold at first, very wary to trust, but she lets slip some small flourishes of honesty at perfect moments throughout the film. The film craft is all round impeccable. Johnny Greenwood's score being one of the highlights. It's lush and precise and is woven in perfectly with newly recorded performances of classical pieces, and it's a testament to Greenwood's skill and his compositional abilities that his pieces are often just as memorable as the older pieces. I've always loved the way that Anderson ties his films together through music, and Phantom Thread is no exception to this. The narrative rises and ebbs with the orchestral pieces that lie at its centre. To speak of the cinematography and visual style of the film almost seems redundant at this point. If you've ever seen a Paul Thomas Anderson film, then you will likely know what to expect, and he does not disappoint here. Visually, it reminded me most of The Master, but less purposefully washed out and faded. Whereas The Master is an old photograph that has faded through the test of time and environment, Phantom Thread is one that has been perfectly preserved behind glass, almost as crisp as the day it was taken. I loved the heavy use of bright, dark contrast throughout the film. This perfectly embodied the themes and aspects of the characters' personalities, the light always being slightly undercut by something more shadowy. However, not everything entirely won me over. Whilst its themes are often presented in a smart manner, I rarely found the film to be entirely engaging. Anderson has been noted as a somewhat objective filmmaker, only presenting just enough to understand the characters and their motivations, but Phantom Thread often goes too far with this, leaving many scenes feeling somewhat lifeless. I was never outright bored, and I was often fascinated. In fact, I was almost constantly fascinated, but often found myself just waiting for the next unique scene, one that wasn't just focused on characters interacting in a way that we'd already seen them interacting before. Many of the scenes didn't feel to me as if they were really imparting anything new. There are many scenes, however, that are incredibly memorable, as well as many excellent lines of dialogue that give away much more than they initially let on. This is one of the biggest recurring themes: hidden layers, hidden aspects. And Anderson seems to have made the film much the same way, never giving the audience everything at once, or perhaps at all. While this is certainly laudable, I also feel like it creates a distance between the film and the audience, and as such I was never able to fully get invested in the central romance, which really is the most important element of the plot. In fact, it's basically the only element of the plot. Everything else plays through a series of quite undercooked subplots that I often found were a lot more fascinating than what was going on screen most of the rest of the time. The ending, and the way that Anderson portrays the ending, is a small stroke of genius, to be sure, but it doesn't feel entirely earned. Only towards the end do we really get to see what the two central characters mean to each other, but for me it wasn't quite enough. I wish Anderson had just played more of it straight, and conversely I also wish that he played more of it weird. The stranger elements in the film work more often than not, and often work to a powerful degree at that, so I wish he had fused these two elements closer together, rather than having the detachedness and the strangeness playing out at different times. Despite these reservations, the filmmaking itself cannot be denied. This is the work of a master, however, it is not itself a masterpiece. There's too much missing, as well as too much filler. Appearances from other notable actors are interesting, but ultimately serve the plot very little. Julia Davis, for example, appears as a cynical aristocrat, and although she hands in a fantastic performance with dry comments and sneers, her character doesn't add up to much before she disappears again in the next scene. I was left wanting a lot more of the smaller elements, subplots that are keys to the characters' actions and minds, but Anderson decided that that level of detail was unnecessary, with many scenes, particularly ones following Alma's life before Woodcock, being cut entirely. Without even knowing about this until after I had left the cinema, I knew and I could feel that the film had missing parts. When you look at a film such as The Master, easily the film in his canon closest to Phantom Thread, although in many ways Punch Drunk Love also competes, you can read so much from each scene. The ambiguity does not hurt the characters or their interactions, and each conversation feels like a revelation. Anderson is certainly capable of this kind of subtly visceral filmmaking, but Phantom Thread is not one where it is on full display. All in all, although I have these criticisms of some of the ways that the narrative is put across, the craft on all accounts is just too perfect to lower the score much, and I feel that perhaps on a second viewing, more of the film's secrets may be unveiled to me. It is a fantastic but flawed film. All in all, I'm feeling a light 8 on this one, so that concludes today's review. What did you think of the film? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Hit us up on Facebook or Twitter and let us know, and if you have any films you're dying for us to review, let us know about that too and we'll see what we can do. As ever, stay safe and keep being awesome, and we will see you in the next episode.